So the challenge for me is to try and explain the modernity of witchcraft. And I'm going to try and do it in several ways. So it's just an approach in anthropology. The idea is that instead of the idea is that instead of magical beliefs being in decline, they could even be on the rise. And the reason for that is specifically, there's something specific about modernity that is seeing this. So we have several kind of classic examples that we use to understand the modernity of witchcraft. The first one is what Tausig calls, I think it's called it's about baptism and baptism of money. So the basic idea is my friend Julie and her husband Stan have a son and they want to baptize their son Joey. And Joey, they invite me to be the godfather. So I go to baptize Joey and then I slip some money up my sleeve, like $50. And then when the priest comes to baptize Joey, his baptism is going to fall on my $50 up my sleeve and not on Joey. So Joey's never going to make it to heaven. And I, by contrast, this $50 will start to produce and become, with God's blessings, it becomes super rich, and I become super rich. The only caveat is I have to spend it on superfluous stuff like Lambos, Burberry. What else do people spend stuff on? Lambos, Burberry, Gucci, things like that, okay? And making it rain down the streets. Now, so Tausig's the anthropologist. He sees this belief in Colombia and he says, you know what? I reckon the way they understand the functioning of money is more insightful than the understandings you get from a first-year lecturer in economics. Because they truly understand how capitalism works. It's a devilish thing. Some people make it super rich by being immoral, whereas people who are moral will probably suffer and work hard for their whole lives. That's what Tausig says. I'm not saying it's a great argument, but that's his argument, okay? Now, the analogy I drew in class now was with a guy called Joseph Gutnick. He's a very rich Melburnian. He was the president of the Carlton Football Club. He belongs, not Carlton, Melbourne Football Club. He belongs to a new Jewish cult. They're new, but they dress up like it's the old days. They dress up like it's 1700s Poland with woolen hats and stuff like that. And you can see them walking around in St Kilda on a Saturday and say hello to them, say shalom, and they'll be happy. They're nice people, and they believe that there are certain people, particularly a guy called the Reb, R-E-B, Reb, who died about 20 years ago in Brooklyn. They believe that the Reb was like a inspired individual. So Gutnick would fly over to Brooklyn and get advice for him on what Australian mining shares to buy. And by doing that, he got super rich. So what I say is, wow, Gutnick got super rich because he understood the connections between spirituality and money. So this is me, not as an anthropologist, this is me, the non-anthropologist Nick. Whereas my uncle who did the MBA course, he's unemployed right now. The reason for that is if you want to make it rich in capitalism, you've got to be keyed into the spiritual world. You've got to be locked into the spiritual world. It's not the same as the Tausig example. Okay, so the anthropologist says, oh, well, this is clear. What's going on here is Jewish people, like Gutnick, if I put my, let me rephrase that. I'm going to put my modernity of witchcraft lens into my microscope and look at this phenomenon of Gutnick going to Brooklyn and speaking to the Reb and getting rich. And I'll say, the reason why that makes sense is that if you want to, the way that these Jewish people understand capitalism is in the functionings of the spiritual world. You can do all the MBA courses you want from their perspective. From their perspective, you can do all the MBA courses you want, but you'll never be rich until you're tied in with, they call him Hashem, the man upstairs, Hashem. I can't even say his word. I can't even say his name. They can't say the G-D word, so just Hashem. And if you're good, if you like that, if you walk around St Kilda on Saturday and don't drive a car, and you don't say that guy's name, and you do all the 10,000 other things you have to do, then, and you go and speak to the Reb, then you'll be good, and you'll be lucky. Not lucky, I call it lucky. They see it, you'll have God's blessing. That's example 2. Example 3 is it's the Cameroon example, but I'm just going to make it a bit more modern because it was written in the 1980s. I'm in Cameroon and Lucinda's in Cameroon. I've been mining Bitcoin and making gazillions. You've been buying the wrong coin, Trump coin or something, and losing out big time. And you're thinking, how come Nick's getting so lucky with money and I'm so unlucky? The real reason, you think, is that while you're asleep, I'm using witchcraft to steal your soul to work mining Bitcoins or whatever they do. I don't know how they actually do it, to make myself rich. The anthropologist of modernity of witchcraft comes and looks at the example and says, using this lens, what I see is that witchcraft is providing a way to understand the functionings of modern capitalism, in particular, what do they call it? What's Bitcoin an example of? What's the larger term? Bitcoin, Ethereum, they're all currency, what do they call it? Not currency, I can't think of the word. Electronic currency? No, oh, wait, brain fade. Whatever that stuff is. Yeah, that invisible. Sorry, crypto, thanks, crypto. So, okay, that's example 3. Just check if there's an example 4 from the blog. So I've done, these examples tie up with, the Cameroon example was the Bitcoin one. The 18 laws one I'll just go through quickly now. It's Taiwan, it's the 1980s. Everybody's making a gazillion on the stock market, but Bree, you're not. And you notice that me and Georgia and Lucinda and Coco are doing really well. And we've been actually going out to this temple of the 19th Lord outside of our capital, Taipei, and being very successful. And you know the reason why now is because by making offerings there, we've been making it rich, whereas you haven't. So then you come and join us, and lo and behold, what happens? You make it rich too. The cynic says, oh, that's just luck, that's just a coincidence. But we know from reading Evans Pritchard, there's more than just one spear. There's more than just one spear. And this is the second spear, which is in this, I'm combining theories a little bit here, but just because you know that theory. The second spear here is giving offerings to spirits. So what we've got here, now, along comes the anthropologist and looks at this story about the 4, I'll be one of the girls, the 4 girls, and then the 5th one joins them and makes it rich. So the anthropologist says, what's happening there is, okay, from one perspective, it's just luck, it's just a coincidence that Bree suddenly becomes rich like those other 4 women. However, from the Taiwanese perspective, it's all got to do with the spirits that are tied up with the functionings of capitalism. Therefore, I will say that for Taiwanese people, the modernity of witchcraft anthropologists say that for the Taiwanese people, the functioning of spirits provides an idiom or a way of understanding capitalism better than any other theory. For them, at least, for them. Some anthropologists want to go a bit further and say, this is not me, okay? They say capitalism sucks, witchcraft sucks too. Therefore, witchcraft is a very good way to explain capitalism. It's all about suffering and dying. Kids, you know, for Nick to be rich in Australia, they say, you need kids to be dying in mines in in Bolivia, and you need kids to be working in sweatshops in India for me to be rich here in Australia, they say. So they hate capitalism and they say, well, actually, it is like the devil. It is like witchcraft. These guys aren't wrong. That's taking it a bit step further. You don't have to go that step far with this theory. You can just say, it does explain it for them very well. From their perspective, from the Taiwanese perspective, the 18th Lord Temple cult beliefs explain capitalism really well. From the Jewish perspective in St Kilda in Australia, the beliefs associated that the Rev promotes explain capitalism really well. From the Cameroonian perspective, the belief in witchcraft stealing souls explains capitalism really well. What was the other example? Oh yeah, from the that was from Bolivia, Colombia. From the Colombian perspective, the work of the devil and the spirits explains the functioning of capitalism and globalization. I've been saying capitalism, but for all of those you could add globalization just as well or better than any other theory. And finally, what you could do in your assessment is say, well, Delonc looks at Basque fishermen in the 1600s going to Newfoundland, which is part of the Americas, was now northeast Canada, Newfoundland, or going to Japan and meeting spirits. And he's convinced that because of this, the Basque country is full of witches. So now the Modernity of Witchcraft scholar comes along and says, well, hang on, this is the modern period, 1600s. These people are flying, they're like today's FIFOs. They're sailing, as CISO as Lucinda called it. They're sailing in and sailing out and making heaps of dough. They're spending it big when they come home and leading to break up marriages, moral disintegration stuff, which was all the rage in Perth back when I was last there in the 2000s. So for them, this is a thoroughly modern experience. It's thoroughly modern in the 1600s. That's a bit of hard for a lot of students to make that step because our high school teachers told us modernity starts in 1800 or whatever it is. But from an athlete,
I think they mean that by like the industrial age.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're
like
right.
Serious technological advancement.
Yeah. But from our perspective, the serious stuff is actually the printing press in the 1500s. Yep. That's the big thing. Yeah, I mean, they're all just important. Put it that way. Industrial revolution is hugely important, but the biggest changes happened around 1500. Columbus reaching the New World. Martin Luther nailing his Columbus that such globalization. Martin Luther nails his thesis on the castle. That starts the Reformation. Galileo with his telescopes and Da Vinci, that starts the Renaissance. So we're already deeply in the modern period, and we'll say that for Delonc, there's a close association between the functionings of capitalism and the functionings of witchcraft. Now, maybe if I was writing this article, I'd go further and say, I'd try and do some research and see if Delonc was actually kind of backward-looking, conservative, more medieval kind of guy in the modern period who was looking back to an older age where the church was even more powerful than it was in 1600, far more powerful, because by then Europe was split in two between the Catholic Church and the Reformation. So he's writing in this context, right? So maybe for him, he wants to bring back that world. He sees this modern world of capitalism and Reformation as very scary, maybe, but I'd have to check up on Delonc and stuff like that. But what you can clearly say without doing much further research is that for these people, there's a clear connection between capitalism, globalization, and the forces of the devil, the spirits, the witchcraft. I think that's the basic idea of this week in the subject. Do you have any questions on that? I'm not sure if this led some level of confusion or not, but in some ways it's not too dissimilar to Evans Pritchard. Like Lucinda, before you were saying, so anthropology theory often builds, sometimes it's a revolution and changes. Around about the 1880s, 1890s, Tyler was saying, man struggles to understand death, and because of this, he believes in magic, and that evolved into religion, and that evolved into science. So that's one theory. And there's nothing wrong with that theory, it's kind of useful. I think
pretty solid, yeah.
Pretty solid, yeah. Evans Pritchard comes along and says, people struggle to understand misfortune, not just death, but that's one of the things. And to understand what we call misfortune, they use witchcraft, along with rational causes like termites they ate out. This modernity of people, witchcraft people, saying something, kind of building out that thing. They've still got, they're seeing it's tied into explanations, explaining things, and basically explaining misfortunes and stuff like that that are occurring in the modern period, in the global period. You can turn to witchcraft, and you can turn to, people will turn to witches, people will turn to spirits, people will turn to religion in increasing numbers, is what they say. So whereas the earlier theorists were saying, oh, these beliefs will die out and be replaced by science, these new theorists, the modernity of witchcraft theorists, and these guys come around in the 1990s and early 2000s, and they're saying, actually it's becoming more prevalent. That's why we have Wicca becoming one of the fastest growing religions in the world. That's why more and more Jewish people are becoming like Joseph Kutny. A good example of this is that, like in my Jewish friends and family, there are a lot of parents who come, well, actually, there are people my age who have gone quite fundamentalist, where their parents were quite liberal and relaxed. Same with my Muslim friends. The mums are wearing dresses and the daughters are all, sometimes. So what that's indicating is like a reinvigoration of religious spirit. Instead of dying out, it's becoming more and more common. And that's kind of what this theory helps to explain. It says that with all the changes of globalization and capitalism, these kinds of beliefs are going to give you a better understanding. I realise now it's actually quite a difficult theory. It's definitely a third year theory. Like, Malinowski is definitely a first year theory. This is definitely a third year theory. So it takes a while to get your head around it. I don't like it personally. I don't think it's a great theory, but I have to teach it because it's not about me teaching you all the things I like, and I'm trying to give you a smorgasbord where you can choose which theories you think are most appropriate to your appetite. For me, I can see all kinds of holes in it, so it's not great.
I think that's what I'm struggling with, is like even theories I don't necessarily agree with, I can understand how they developed.
Yeah.
And this one I'm just like, I just don't get it.
Okay, I'll just try.
Like as in like it just
Let me try one more time.
sense.
Okay, we have to, just concede, just accept, like with Wicca, the mothers of Wiccans, my friends who are Wiccans, are probably believe in science and stuff like that. They can't understand how their daughters who are my age, the 70-year-olds can't understand how the 50 and 40-year-olds got so into this kind of religious fervor, okay? Because they think that, so something's changed. People are becoming more increasingly religious. Anthropologists now have to explain this. We can't go back to the old theories that said people are going to become more and more scientific and more secular. So they've got another theory, which is, it's the opposite. As we get more increasingly modern, the more these beliefs crop up. That's why there was a witch hunt in the 1500s, because modernity came along.